So, welcome everyone on International Dance Day. I had the privilege of interviewing Lucie. It was almost a year ago. It was last June, and I was on a very random cabin getaway, and we did.
Oh yeah, we had Zoom problems then, didn't we?
We really did. It's been a year. Lucie is known on Instagram as the dance psychologist. At this point, not only has she added incredible research to the dance community over in the UK, but also, this year you've popped up in Hong Kong, you've popped up in like all over the world, and I noticed that you're transitioning out of the academic lecturing into full-time psychology and workshops and seminars and all the rest. So congratulations on the
Oh, thank
transition.
you.
It's very exciting. Okay, well, I reached out and talked to some teachers before. I even sent you an email to say, where are we at with mental health, with mental skills? How are you feeling? How are you feeling in the studios? And so many teachers were like, you don't have to sell me on it. This is so important. I see it in my students. I see how valuable this kind of conversation and this work is. But like as a dance teacher and as somebody who, is teaching these kids how to dance, what's my role and how can I support them? So I thought maybe we could even start there with just creating what is called a resilient facilitative environment. So with that, we know that we, as the climate engineers of the room, have the ability to help shift the energy or the focus in a way that feels supportive and encouraging and exciting. So you really jam on some of this environment stuff, and I'm wondering if you could share with us, given pandemic, given restrictions, given all those things, do you have any suggestions or helpful information for us to really create the best environments for dancers at this point?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to share something else with you that I read quite recently, just in relation to some research that I was doing, and it kind of taps into what you were just saying. And I just found this really fascinating. And I don't mean to alarm anyone who's a teacher on here or a parent, but I was reading this research that asked dancers to basically rank the level of importance of figures in their life. And female dancers in particular ranked their dance teacher above their mother, which was very interesting in terms of the influence that they were having at that time. So I think it's really, really important to have this conversation, and it is interesting because much of the kind of psychology and the ideas that underpin it also underpin different kinds of parenting styles as well. So the same advice would go to a parent about how to encourage and nurture the child as the dance teacher. But I think so. It's what in psychology we would call the motivational climate. So it's this kind of perception of health and well-being that's occurring inside the studio, and how we can encourage through different sorts of acts and behaviors that we can do. So we can kind of create that climate through two very different strategies, really. One is through control. Similarly, as a parent can exert a lot of control and a lot of punishment to regulate behavior, and that is kind of known to have much more negative health and well-being outcomes. Or we can go for one which is much more around kind of support, encouragement, a focus much more on process than product. And really the difference between the two is very much about language choices and how you're using your language to instruct, or what the focus is that you're encouraging. So I think really always just keep creating a focus that's around the process, that's around enjoyment, and of being a dancer, not dancing, if that makes sense. So having joy in moving and dancing rather than kind of being a product of what you want to look like at the end of it. So the more you can focus on engaging with the joy of dancing rather than the joy of being a beautiful dancer, if that makes sense, then I think that's a really good starting place.
So coming back to that idea of moving your body feels good rather than maybe a hypercritical correction of turnout for like a better blend of the two, if anything.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really easy to say it didn't look good, or you need to change how it looks. So that's more of a kind of externalized focus on why that child or person is dancing. So because we want it to look good or look perfect. But if it's more about enjoying the process of working how what does your body, how can you shift little bits of how your body is so that you feel better when you're doing it and it looks good, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Something that comes to mind, I actually had this conversation on Tuesday with a dancer, and I was saying, as a teacher right now, I'm feeling this responsibility to like make it fun. Like sort of this idea of like should we play games? Like I'm almost at a loss for how to keep people engaged and remember it's fun. And I really appreciated, she's a teenager, and I really appreciated her honesty and her reminder, because she goes, I really would rather dance, knowing that and being reminded that dance is a way to process emotions and to develop emotional literacy. And this might be the way that they're doing it right now. So when we're looking at this extreme, like, I want to make it fun, I want them to love dance, how do you guide dance instructors and parents? Because some have seen their child's love of dance dim.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there's only so much we can control on how much we get them to love dance, right? So I mean, any advice on how to keep the passion and the fuel sort of fanned?
Yeah, okay. So I think it's really important to think, like, we often think with things like it's in a category. So you either love dance or you don't love dance, or I used to love dance and now I'm in the category that I didn't. But it's really useful to think of it as like you exist on a continuum. So you could probably line up every dancer you've got in your class in a list of like who's we would traditionally say the least to the most motivated. But actually what's really important is to think about kind of what's driving that motivation. So you could probably put them also in a different order around what's driving them. So at the one end you might have ones who are still going because they feel like they have to, like I'm compelled to have to go because I don't want to let my parents down, or because I don't know what else I would do without it, which is actually probably, if you've got kind of high level motivation but it's coming from that perspective, that's a bit less healthy than having not much motivation at all. So it's kind of this idea that it exists on a continuum from kind of, again, like what's called a controlled regulation. So I have to do it, through to an autonomous motivation, which is I want to. So the more that you can start expressing, I want to do it of my own volition, the better. So you're kind of shifting it just tiny bits. So I think the idea is not to force somebody into, I have to love it again, but to get them to want to engage for a particular reason. So even if you can get someone from saying, I'm not motivated, or I feel like I have to, well, I want to go to dance at the moment because it's a good way for me to connect with my friends, that's a good shift back towards loving it. So if you kind of lined everybody up, I want to go because my friends are going, or because it's keeping me connected to people during the pandemic, is a healthier form of motivation. And with time, if we stick with that, we can then get that to move back towards love, if it makes sense. So it's like everybody's in a row, and if you can get everybody to hop one place up, eventually they might get back towards the I love it. But for somebody to kind of go from I'm disengaged to I'm engaged straight away, that's quite difficult. So it's kind of like this step-by-step reconnecting with something about dance in order to get back to that love of it. But I also think there are ways that you can deliver dance that can help people kind of reconnect with why they love it. And I don't know if that was going to be one of your questions anyway, a bit more about the kind of how, but I think even small things, like if you're teaching online, just asking people to start at the beginning, like, why are you here? And have a think about, actually, why am I here, or what do you want to gain from this today, can help them to actually articulate those thoughts that they're having as well. So the more that actually you verbalize it and you talk about it, the more it's going to help them too.
Yes. Right away, as you were talking, I was thinking about the why exercise, where you give some space to journal around why do you enjoy dance, or what part, even maybe right now it's what parts do you enjoy? You know, they might be just like, it's the only time I get to see my friends, or whatnot. Yeah, and I think that I generally start classes with an intention. And as we talked through yesterday with the teens, like, why, I kind of did a pause of, why do you think that I'm doing this with you? And they're like, I don't know, just to have a reason to be here and whatnot. And I said, yes, and it's also a great way to enhance autonomy, and you get to pick how you're here and why you're here, and then that way you're sort of internalizing and building some of that internal motivation than just the external. And I do know some dancers right now are in dance because their parents have told them they have to finish out the year. And so that's always a little tricky because they might not want to be there. But again, as the climate engineer, let's just pick something that you could still get out of our time
Yeah,
together.
yeah, exactly. Even if it's that, you may very well know that they aren't going to return, they're going to see out the year and they won't return. But even if their motivation can shift away from because my parent wants me here to because it's good for my fitness or because it's something to do like to keep me engaged with life whilst in the lockdown. So if there's something that you can shift it away from because I have to be to I actually want to be, even if it's not because I'm totally in love with dance still, that's still healthier. So, yeah.
Yeah, love that. Have you seen um, or perhaps heard, you have such like a global scale or a global understanding. There's a couple of things that I notice. One is the dancers, especially Hard Out to Ontario, who's just had such a long go, um, just this deflation, and it's that fine line where feeling helpless feels like hopeless, and we had to have a conversation around it still counts, like your effort and your energy still count, but knowing so many dancers are perfectionists, knowing so many dancers are feeling that like I can't train the way that I want to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice or awareness around how we can sort of support them as they move through or fight their inner critic, which we have trained so well, but they're like, dancing on carpet and just having a minute?
Yeah, and I guess again, it's about trying to find a way to promote the value of those sessions of learning online, if they're learning online, and trying to encourage them to see the value in it. And I think in a way that's a more of an adolescent mindset as well. Of if I can't have what I want, it's not worth it at all. So I think there's something to be aware of in that as well. Particularly if you're dealing with adolescents, that's kind of a bit of a dominant mentality. So it's harder. It's going to be harder for any teacher to try to break through that. But I think just as much as possible, trying and find a connection with something that makes it fun or worthwhile. And again, just exercises to kind of articulate why that is. Because I think one of the risks with learning online is that the students come on and they become very passive. So I'm just this like passive recipient behind the screen. So I think the more that you can make them actively engaged in that and promote their involvement in what's going on online, that can also help and promote them to be kind of just participating a bit more as well. So I think taking them from behind a screen to a really valued member of what's going on in that dance class, which I think for many people is kind of maybe shaking up how they might want to teach or deliver. But I think the more you just have bodies behind a screen not involved, the more that's harder for people as well. And I also think that in addition, of course, we've got the issue of them looking at their bodies on the screen as well, which is a problem too. So I think any flexibility around kind of ways of shaking up the dance class and doing things differently, I think become really, really important.
That actually sparks, I have two areas that right away I go to. One is there's obviously prolonged stress right now. Some of the experiences, both with the body and the brain, are just so many people thought this would be done now, or it's just been really, really hard for too long. And simultaneously, Lisa Damore posted an article yesterday about how eating disorders have skyrocketed, especially through young girls.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we know that there is some stress and control things built in there. Beyond some of, and this might be an unfair question, so you're allowed to say that too, but we're told time and time and time again, practice breathing. We all know that like breath is foundational work for calming the nervous system, for getting into your body. We're told to go for a walk, get outside, take a bath, some of those real self-care nurturing pieces. I'm wondering in these levels of prolonged stress, where perhaps a bath isn't going to do the trick. Is there anything that you would suggest or guide us to notice and pay attention and support with?
Mm. Yeah, so I think, I mean, all of those examples that you gave, yes, they are going to help the psychological side of things, but they're fundamentally addressing the physical manifestation of stress. And obviously, the two are intertwined. The more physically stressed, the more cognitively we start responding, and vice versa. But I think it's really important to also do things that are directly tackling the thought processes that are going on. So it's totally feasible. You could be lying in the bath for a good hour, still stressing. And still having all of those thought processes. I'm totally. So I think what you need to be doing is also addressing somehow the cognitive, like the thought-based stress that's going on as well. Either through, I mean, journaling is a good example, or mindfulness, I think, is a really, really clear example as well. And you can do some of those activities. So, for example, having a bath or going for a walk in a way that are not only going to reduce the kind of physical stress that you're feeling, but also the psychological stress by doing them coupled with mindfulness. So, I don't know if anyone knows about this, but you can, for example, have a bath in a very mindful way that's going to prevent you from or decrease any possibility of lying in the bath thinking about all the things that are very stressful to you. So I think trying to ensure that any attempt at relaxation doesn't actually become a stressor in itself, and then trying to use kind of psychological skills on top as well to address the psychological stress becomes really, really important. And that's difficult when you're on your own in a pandemic. It's difficult anyway. But I think another really useful tip is, because one of the biggest stress buffers is other people, is a concept called social support. I think a really useful thing to do is kind of create like an accountability group or something like that, where you connect with other people and share what you're doing to manage your stress. And I think, again, because particularly adolescents have had a lot of time away from friends, creating a kind of a group environment where you do it together, or you maybe all take up journaling and discuss how it's going, I think that can also help too. It's like science actually does genuinely say that a problem shared is a problem halved. So I think tying it all in together is the best way to do it.
Oh, I like that. Problem shared. Fun. I the one I resonated with, and this is probably a little dark and twisty for this conversation, but remember Michael Gervais sharing the notion that you're as sick as your secrets. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the more that you go inside, the more that you contain, you know, feelings of aloneness, or perhaps like this eating disorder article, it actually just gets worse. So just being able to share with your one person alleviates some of that stress.
Yeah, and I haven't read that article, and I haven't actually seen that data or anything about that. But just reflecting on that, I think it kind of makes sense that that has happened, that there's that increase in it, because it is, as you said, completely about control. So what's happened over the last year is we've had the control removed from us. So when people feel a loss of control from other things in their life, that's often when you get restrictive behaviour starting to come in, because you want to regain control over something. So I think it's important, if you kind of are worried about a student, that you're thinking about how can we kind of implement some degree of control in another area as well, because people crave a sense of control. So we can start restricting our eating when everything else feels like it's too much. Like suddenly I can pounce on my eating and change my eating habits so that I'm in charge of something. So I think kind of being really aware of anyone where you're starting to see and that they're expressing, I'm not in control anymore, or I feel really kind of confused and anxious. I think that's really important, and I'm sad to hear that I haven't read that article yet.
Yeah, I think I can send it to you. I want to take a pause and invite anyone in the chat at any time, if there's something that's resonating to be true, if there's something you would like us to go deeper into. This is as much about my curiosity as what actually feels good and relevant to you guys on the call right now. So if at any point hop into the chat or just say pause, please say more. Like, happy to do that and happy to offer that. Um, knowing that you've had such an interesting year talking to so many people, has there been anything that has really surprised you, or a conversation that you're like, I didn't think I'd be talking about this so much?
I don't know. I suppose the thing that's actually surprised me the most is is how quickly teachers adapted to Zoom learning and how willing they were to kind of shake up and do things differently. So a lot of the work that I've actually done was just people coming to me saying, how can I engage my students on Zoom or through online learning as well? And I think the thing that I've really enjoyed the most is that so I think it was you I had the conversation with on the podcast last year about doing things a bit differently and shaking up the kind of traditional technique class. And I think that there's something to be said in the fact that if anyone has started to do Zoom teaching differently, that's really good for kind of health and well-being, and some of those practices can be taken away into the dance studio afterwards. So so much of the work that I've done with dance teachers has been like, how can I sustain teaching on Zoom, or what can I do differently to promote teaching on Zoom or to help them to keep well on Zoom. And I think that the important message with that is that anything that you're doing now is probably going to have, if you're responding well and adapting well to it, is actually going to have a really positive impact on their health and well-being in the longer term, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Because what you're doing is teaching them a different way of doing things, developing that resilience, creating that kind of engagement and involvement. And I think it's really important to think about what aspects of what have worked on Zoom can you take with you into the studio when you return as well.
Love that. Is there, this is gonna get, I mean, if you guys don't ask the questions, I'm gonna jump on over this, but I'm gonna focus on the dance teachers for a moment, because the dancers have got a lot of airspace on how do we support them, how do we keep them mentally well, with the tools and the time that we have. I'm noticing a strong level of burnout in staff and faculty and teachers. And perhaps it is just me, but I am feeling what I call weary. Just like I never got that full recharge. The one and part of it is self-induced, because there was always this underlying, okay, so what does the money look like? What do the finance look like? What does the schedule look like? The schedule changes. And I'm seeing a couple of head nods, which I'm like, great, not in this alone. How do we, as the leaders in the room and the teachers who are doing our best, and we've done our best and we've done incredible things throughout the year, and we have been so adaptable, we're not done yet. And this isn't over yet. So do you have any advice, or even things we should be reading or practicing or learning in order to find some recharge when there's maybe not a lot of space for it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And again, I guess anytime we're being reactive rather than in control, that does lead to burnout. So you're kind of like you have no control. It's like you're chasing something, it keeps changing direction, and you have to keep going after it. So if you imagine like you're like running after a bus or something, and then you don't know where it's going next, and you have to keep up with it and keep going and going, you're gonna fatigue, like you will get burned out. So I think what you have to do at some point, and this is really difficult for dance teachers, is actually maybe change something so that it works for you. And maybe even one time you're going to teach online and think, right, what do I actually need? Like, how would I benefit from this class being today? And shake it up and do it how you need for it to be that day. And as a byproduct, the students will probably be engaged anyway. I recently just wrote this article for one of the dance organisations in the UK, and it was pretty much asking exactly this question. And I think the really important thing is that actually the teacher, if the teacher isn't kind of there mentally, isn't ready to engage, then the students aren't going to be either. So actually sometimes it's just about like, hang on a minute, how do I need to do this differently? What do I need to do? And it might just be that you don't want to plan that session, that it's all going to be improvised, that you want to shake it up and do something because you need to reconnect as well. So I think whatever we're doing for the students, it also needs to be for the teacher as well. So I personally don't see any problem with at some point you deciding, actually, like, this is how I want to do it, this is how I want to dance today, this is my idea of how we should do it, and we're going to do something completely different as well. But I also think that it's just about using that other time effectively and being fair to yourself. And as an academic and a lecturer as well, who's been trying to sustain student involvement on Zoom, I think it's just about perspective too. that you have to really put yourself first as well, and in that kind of pie chart of everything that matters, just making sure that you are thinking of yourself enough in it too, and doing all the self-care and activities for yourself as well. And I think maybe looking after yourself more than you might traditionally want to becomes more and more important the longer it goes on. Being potentially a bit selfish is really necessary to do that. But the other thing is as well, I suppose at some point, you know, if you imagine like you're chasing the bus and it keeps changing direction, at some point you kind of just have to say, I'm going to stop for a bit. I'm just going to pause. And I also think that, you know, there's nothing wrong with at some point saying we won't go online, we're going to do something different where we don't go online. I set the students an activity or they go and do something different offline. And that's how we use this time. And you tie that kind of pause for you into an activity for them as well, because you may find they engage in a different way anyway if you're doing something totally different with them. If you ask them, you know, spend this hour that we would have been dancing, going and finding a piece of choreography that you really love or something like that, and then doing something a little bit different. I think it's just finding new ways and being a bit different about how you do things.
As you described, the sort of dance how you want to dance, or do the class that maybe that you need. I'm reminded of at the dance teacher retreat, Christian Vincent came in. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but he did just the most sort of like basic and authentic jazz. Not the I gotta be cool, I gotta be hip, I gotta listen, you know, I gotta choreograph to Billie Eilish. It was like putting on legit jazz music, doing the Charleston, doing just like, you know, some of the most fun, authentic, simple, and we had a blast. And I took that and I actually started to include some of that in my warm-up. This was pre-pandemic, but I would go on YouTube and look up all the dances of the 60s and then sort of make this like ridiculous combo. They had so much fun. And I was just like, oh yeah, I don't think that they had even learned those dances, which is hilarious. I'm like, the mashed potato guys, no. But reminding ourselves that like the things that we fell in love with, we might still love and they might love too. But I do know that I'm going to just speak from personal experience. I put a lot of pressure on coming up with the most fun, the newest, the most engaging. Like I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to make a combo today, but like the kids would like a combo. And then that permission slip that you just offered of like, make a combo, but make it the one that is fun for you. And they just might enjoy it. You know, they also might like the simplicity of it and just the movement of it. And the music is always like, pull up the 60s, joyous, so fun.
You know, one of the best things that I've seen over the last year, because I've been really fortunate that some people have just invited me to watch what they're doing on Zoom, to see, like, to advise and to say, like, how's it going? What do you think? Could we be doing better? I saw one thing that I think was really awesome, and I don't know if anyone's doing this. You might already be doing this. It could be like everyone's doing it. But it's just a little tip that I thought was just really great. It was that actually, the teacher kind of led the warm up for about 10 minutes, and then the rest of the hour was purely student led. So what was happening was that the students would have basically like 5 minutes each where they would one student would start dancing and everybody would copy, and you'd have to sustain it for 5 minutes, and the student was picking the music, and then it kind of lagged on to the next person, so they'd take over the music and then they'd dance in their style, and everybody was just copying, and the teacher was a participant. So the teacher was not leading, the teacher was becoming like a student in that context, and every student on the call was having an opportunity to lead for 5 minutes, and the teacher just took a step back and was there as a dancer rather than the leader. So I think anything like that as well, where you also just give yourself the opportunity to dance, not to teach, and become one of the students and at one with the students, can also be quite effective too.
Love that. And I will say, oh man, like you had mentioned around, you might have to prioritize some self-care, you might have to put some boundaries. I have been frustrated with myself, but also want to recognize that I'm like not able to recover as quickly, or I didn't have to put a boundary here before, and now I just like can't not. I know that self-care sometimes it's just like, yeah, mask first, mask first. And I'm almost like, um, it's sort of like around just having to manage myself. And so I just want to share that with any sort of teachers who are also feeling like, just like, I didn't have to do this before, or even this like, but I don't want to have to relearn or ask for help now. And I think that that's one thing that I did do, and I would suggest anyone do, is for goodness sake, if you can, just for one night, grab a sub. Give yourself a night off, grab a sub. It's magic. Just, giving yourself permission to loosen that grip a little bit. Linda, I see, I'm just going to read it out because I don't know if, oh yeah, everyone can see it, but it's essentially your staff is starting to see a number of kids, 10 to 15, anxiety, depression, overwhelm. We've been expecting this from the older students who may be graduating and they like missed so much, but they seem to be handling it better than the tweens teens. Is anyone else experiencing this? Yeah, so some 14 to 19s, yeah, and depending on where you are in the country, I think it's also different, which has been interesting. Yeah, so 14 to 19 hardest hit. Yeah, I've worked with a lot of young ones right now that are like, they're still fully engaged, and I'm like, great. But yeah, the tweens and teens is really tricky. I did post on my Instagram, Lisa Damore did a podcast episode on how do you tell the difference between sadness and depression? How do you tell the difference between anxiety and an actual disorder? But Lucie, I would love your perspective on this when we're looking at these young hearts and minds that are really trying to navigate this.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important question, because it's really difficult to know when someone is sad, which we all worried, which is like a natural response to what's been going on, versus actually that then taking over into depression and anxiety. So I think it's really important to, again, just make sure that things are being labelled correctly. But I suppose if you truthfully, if you feel concerned that a student has depression or anxiety, I think, and this sounds harsh coming from a psychologist, but there's also a recognition that to a degree that's not your responsibility to have the answer or to make that person feel better. If it's really an experience of depression or anxiety, that child or young person needs appropriate professional help as well. So I think it's really important to separate yourself from that. And I think that the difficulty is, and that you as a teacher, of course, we will see that we are so important to that person, but I think it's about just remembering that you are one of many influences in that person's life, and not taking on too much burden or too much responsibility, that you hold the key to their mental health. And I know it's really difficult because you care about these young people, you love them, they love you back, and we have like these beautiful relationships with them. But I think it's really important not to, for your own mental health as well, take the responsibility, shoulder that responsibility of the mental health of the young people that you're supporting. I think it's really difficult with different age groups. I think that often younger children might appear to be coping because they might not have learned necessarily the social skills around how to communicate their thoughts and feelings so effectively. So I think it's really easy to think that younger kids are doing well, or are doing okay, because they don't necessarily know about the words to anxiety or depression in the same way, or they don't necessarily know how to label their emotions. Whereas older teenagers tend to know that language, they tend to understand that language. But I think for you, that like just thinking about this, that degree of responsibility, I think one of the most important questions that you can ask to be able to help them to seek the appropriate help is, how long have you felt like that for? So kind of, is this a consistent feeling? Did you feel like that yesterday? How many days have you been feeling like that for? And kind of, is it on and off? Is it consistent? And I think that that's the most effective question that you can ask to be able to understand, are they having a bad day, or is this indicative of a longer period of time? And I think that it is very likely that there will be an increase in the percentage of people experiencing a mental health problem because of the pandemic. But I think just trying to separate your responsibility for that. It's not you. You're not responsible for that. There's probably very little that you can do to directly prevent those mental health concerns, but what you can do is encourage them to seek help for that, outside of the dance studio, I guess.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because that was sort of what I've been just pondering and navigating, because everyone's definitely allowed to be sad right now, and everybody, so many of the dancers have heavy hearts. Um, and also I so this is interesting, and I don't have a solution and I don't have an answer for it, but I was talking to one of my friends, and they have a child in elementary school, and every elementary school has a counselor. Yay, right? And the child is working through some stuff, and so the mom's like, "Go see the counselor." And right away there was resistance. And we were sort of talking through it, and there's still a lot of stigma, even though there's help right there. And I'm like, so part of what I've been saying is go to the counselor, go to the psychologist, even like you go to the chiropractor or the dentist. There's somebody to support your well-being. There's somebody to support your health. And just recognizing, oh, as much as we're talking about it, there's still a little bit of stigma that can exist within schools or these conversations. And so even being able, as the adult in the room who's admired, who, like you said, we're such a role model, to be able to say, like, I see a psychologist, or I saw a psychologist when I really needed that support. That's maybe all we need to do. That's it right there. Stop.
I completely agree, and I think actually the earlier that you're teaching them that as well, that's how we address these problems, the better, particularly if any are going to go into the profession. We know that mental health in dancers is problematic, that there aren't necessarily always direct lines of resource. I think the earlier we teach younger children in dance as well, that when you're experiencing challenges around your mental health, you should speak up about it and seek help. I think that's really important as well, because I think looking at kind of 10, 15 years down the line, some of the work that I do with professional dancers is that they haven't really had those clear lines taught about go seek help. It's okay to seek help. So I think it's a really valuable thing to also teach them this early on as well. And I think just reflecting on like my role as a psychology lecturer, psychology degrees I think attract students who have questions around their mental health, who've had lots of lived experience as well. And for me, one of the hardest things has always been that I'm a psychology lecturer as a woman as well. Younger female, they tend to come to me and tell me lots of problems. But even so, when a student comes to me and divulges a mental health concern, I'm their lecturer in that position. I'm not their mental health support. So we have a really clear kind of policy for, thank you for sharing that with me. Here's now what I would recommend that you would do, despite the fact that I am a psychologist, despite the fact that I'm teaching them how to talk about mental health. And I think that that's really important for yourself as well, because in my earlier days of doing it, I wasn't so good at doing that. And I used to take it on a lot more. And I used to go home and really kind of reflect on it and worry, had I said the right thing? But the more confident I became in knowing it's okay for me to say, like, I'm not the right person, but you can get help, and I want to encourage you to get help. And then a week later, hey, did you go get that help? Like, how did it go? That's probably much more effective for you as well in not taking that home. So even psychologists, we do it too.
Yes. Yeah, and I see somebody commenting that, that it can blur the boundaries between student and teacher, and it can be quite disruptive and even destructive. And it's a mucky water. That's not your job. Even though like you said, we care so deeply, sometimes the most caring thing we can do is recognize that's not our job and support them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm seeing some question around practical tips for parents on what to do in the moment when the teen does not feel like logging into Zoom for her dance class.
Okay, interesting one. So I'm going to say something that might be controversial, and I'm sorry, teachers, but my feeling would probably be one time, allow that. Say, okay, that's fine, you don't have to attend today. Because again, if it's always the parent or the teacher kind of regulating it, they're not going to develop that autonomous feeling. I think the one time, say that's okay, and almost surprise them and see what the reaction is, and then maybe discuss afterwards Um, how do you feel about the fact that you didn't attend, and use that as a springboard to have a conversation about it? But I actually think that probably as a one-off, that's quite an effective thing to do, is to say, that's okay, don't log on, let's chat about it later as to why you didn't want to. What's this actually telling us? Of course, over time that becomes expensive if you paid for a lot of classes, so obviously not condoning that you do that longer term, but I actually think that every now and then that's probably okay. Because if we are telling them you have to do it, the more they're going to become resentful, and the more that motivation gets externalized. And I think actually just a pause is potentially what that person needs. If they don't want to go on right now, maybe just that one time, that pause might actually help. And that would be my kind of suggestion.
I think that's, even as a dance teacher, I think that's fair. And I've seen so many kids need that permission and that pause. And I think there's this like, oh, we'll never get them back. And if they're well supported, and the conversation continues, it's not just go, not go, yes, no, between, the family, the parents who got really curious, who wanted to, they then wanted to connect in and see not only what the dancer was feeling, but are there some other options we need to look at even for a shorter period of time? Maybe the dancer does just need a week off. Like, some of us would like a week off, and we're not online for school and for dance. And so definitely respecting that. Totally fair. I also know that when we're looking at sort of maybe some of the feelings or anxiety that are connected to long days of dance, it might be worth a conversation of what if you just did one of the classes? See if you just do one. If you want to keep going after that, great. If you don't, permission to leave or whatnot. But that could be another option if it's something that goes much longer.
Yeah, and I think another option, and this would be kind of more of a like the teacher supporting this, but I think another option as well is that if the teacher is supportive of this as a general thing, that sometimes it's not because that person doesn't want to be there, but because they don't want to dance. So maybe affording them to be present in a different way. So maybe they're like just watching it or doing something different, like, if we can message the teacher first and say she doesn't want to go on, but can she just observe, or can we give her a very specific role or something different to do? So I think the more the teacher can be flexible about that as well. I mean, I'm sure that there are times when dancers just simply don't want to put the camera on because they just don't want to look at themselves. And I think if we can just be a bit flexible about that, that might also act as a negotiation point as well.
Love that. Yes, and I know the camera conversation is always very interesting because there is part, especially in schools, around, they don't have to have their cameras on. And as the teacher, I'm like, I need to see your body for safety. Like this is a safety issue. I need to see what you're working with, how you're working. I need to be able. So always a bit of a dance. There's a great highlighter on the chat right now. Abby says, I think many of our dancers were very competition focused and are now having a hard time without that external motivation. So any tips on the transition from a very product oriented mentality to a process mentality? And then Hannah sort of grows with saying even some of the parents were really competition focused. And while the dancers are doing well and getting a lot from their classes, their parents aren't seeing the benefit of the class because where's the goal? Where's the trophy? Where's the stage performance? So I recognize this. I had a conversation once where I said, and I could be, maybe I'm just verbal vomiting, but I feel like something in this is true. The generation who is teaching right now, we're the teachers. When we signed up to dance, there was maybe one festival. So we signed up for dance and we got to compete once, or we got to perform at recital, but we signed up for dance. And the way that our culture has sort of shifted, kids sign up for competitive dance. And then this like, hey, you can have fun doing the Charleston for no reason at all is kind of like backwards. It's not something along the way kind of swiveled or switched. So for the dancers who always signed up for competitive dance because they liked competition, because that was the whole thing that they were drawn to, or that's what motivated them. Nothing wrong with that, but now there's no competition, or it looks different. So any tips for one, Let's start with the dancers, transitioning them from product to process.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I suppose if you add up the sums of the process, you get the product anyway. So I think if you look at it as like, okay, you were training for a competition, but you have to train in order to do well at the competition. So I think if you can use the training as this is part of a process that feeds into the product. So focusing on today, we are working on blah, 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 and this will help you when you go to the competition. However, right now it's really important we just focus on this aspect of it. And as a secondary thing, also when you go to your competition, you develop this skill. But I think there's something in the training of like these that even maybe even like doing an exercise with them of thinking about like when you go to competition, what are the elements of what that good product looks like, and then using that to focus the training. So okay, you think that a good product is flexible or something, so then you're working 1 week particularly on on flexibility or something like that, or a good product is stage presence. So at this session we're working on stage presence. So you're using the product in a way to motivate them, but by breaking it down into the sub elements of what that process might look like. And then in the delivery of that, not making it particularly about competition at the end, but rather we're focusing on bits that are valuable in a competitive answer, but in as fun a way as possible, if that does that make sense?
I think so. I recognize that I was kind of talking to the dancers, and as the teacher, I think we see the process, but we also understand the process. Hence we're teachers. We are optimistic. We're all about like what's the possibility here? What can I take? How I get this class in September. Where do I want them by the end of June? We kind of know this, see this, feel this, but we don't ever actually necessarily share it, like the building blocks that we see, the reasons why we do certain across the floors, the reason why we work certain skills. So really, I think opening up that conversation is a wonderful one. And I said to the dancers, I was like, guys, we as your teachers, we've seen you leave for summer break and just like come back in September and be like, because there was no dancing. So we're used to you taking breaks and having to rebuild. The kids just never thought about it. But I shared with them, I was like, we can get back the power. We can get back so many, the turns, the technique, the alignment. My little whisper of wisdom was like, keep working on your flexibility because you can control that. And that's the one thing that is just, it takes the longest to get back if you lose it with all them growing like, beanstalks. Is there anything around communication with the parents? I know actually a lot of studio owners have tried to say like, there will be a competition or there is something to look forward to. But after a year of that, there's kind of this like, cynical, like maybe. So when these parents are also invested in competition, what does that look like maybe from a communication standpoint?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, again, you probably just want to focus on engaging the parents in the idea of process. So maybe communication of what their children are learning or gaining along the way. Again, maybe asking parents to sometimes come on and watch the call and just be part of that process. And it's really tricky when you've got really competition focused parents, but I think they need a little bit of education as well about the idea of the training leads to that. And I suppose it's like, I don't know, I guess the only thing I can think is just sharing with the parents this idea that like if we will watch the Olympics and we're watching a competition, that requires like this really substantial investment and involvement, and you can't, like, these Olympians aren't going to be stopping training because the Olympics is happening like in a year rather than now. So I think it's just committing to that idea of like knowing that you have to train the process. You can't not. Your child is not going to suddenly be able to compete if we don't carry on doing this. So I think the more you can actually involve the parent in the training and also help them to enjoy it as well, help them to see what their child is gaining that is not just winning the competition or doing really well at competition, but actually look at your child having a nice time, look at your child with friendships, look at your child improving their confidence. So involving the parent, I think in that will help too, if possible, finding ways to involve the parent, even maybe getting the parents dancing in one session as well.
I've seen that. I have seen that. Yeah, I think it's what I see as an infographic as a reminder of what builds up to the stage, what actually builds up, and recognizing and sympathizing that so many parents aren't allowed in the building anymore, or when they like that's not a thing, so they don't see the group growing, they don't see the choreography being developed, they've lost perspective too on just what are we doing here, and reminding them just of their child dancing on Zoom, that's quite a remarkable feat. So why don't we just focus on that growth mindset? Why don't we focus on putting in the work and showing up? And that's a big celebration. I see Leanne was sharing that ballet exams have really helped because there's these mini goals. Now, the ones who don't have the exam goal are struggling more than others. Now, I will say I've heard the opposite side of that tale as well. I've heard ballet exams are stressing them out. They don't want to do it. They don't feel ready. They don't like how they look in a bodysuit. Why are we pushing this? And then some people are really thriving. So I know some studios have almost said, your choice, this year, your choice. And the same goes for performance. So many kids are really dying and wishing and wanting to be on the stage again. And there was a situation where some kids got to go on stage and the teacher said their nerves were off the charts because it had been so long. Their expectations were high. They had built up so much that they were panicking at something that used to feel so good and so exciting. And so do you have any advice for preparing them for that? Thank you, Hannah. Yeah.
So if we're returning to kind of performance,
we kind of have like a year to prepare them to get back on the stage, with the assumption being that next year at this time we would be in a theater in whatever capacity, but they would be competing again. And how do we gently but confidently create the environment, create the conversations, create the experiences that support them so that when they get to the stage, they're not panicking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's that kind of slow and steady approach, isn't it? That you want to start talking about it, but not promising them anything because we don't know what's going to happen, but also just starting to discuss. I think a lot of this just comes in the open discussion of how are you feeling, how might you feel, what are the thoughts and feelings that you've got associated with this, which for a teacher that can be tricky if you don't have that experience in doing that. But I suppose this is where your kind of experience, Lauren, with the mental skills training comes in, because we know that you can help people to prepare for performance through the development of mental skills. So through kind of positive self-talk, through imagery use. So the more that you can start to implement that earlier, but in a really flexible way that's not promising them too much in case it will go wrong again, I think it's really important. But I think also just giving mini opportunities. I think small opportunities along the way that are kind of like performances, but without that particular pressure. So can you find somewhere along the way, almost like a surprise moment where you're asking them to improvise in more of a performative context or something like that. So you're kind of giving them mini opportunities. I think if someone is underprepared, if they've been away from performing or competing for 2 years, that's going to be really difficult. So any small opportunity, even if it's just the parents coming in to watch at some point, or recording something, say, okay, today we're going to record it and offer it for the parents to watch it, whatever your policies are in your studio. But giving opportunities, just little moments along the way, I think will really help, so that they feel like it's not the first time for the last 2 years. And that will all depend, what your time frame looks like, what you're working on. But any small opportunity, even if it's kind of if one class performs to a different year group or something like that. So at one particular performing arts school I've been working at, they're moving now towards finally making it back on a stage, and they've been using a kind of preparatory task of they perform to other year groups, so other age dancers see them and they give feedback, and obviously that feedback's not that critical because they're children. So that kind of just using each other as well to create that performance environment.
I am nodding and nodding and nodding because it's like, yes, yes, yes. We used to perform in malls we used to perform in old folks' homes and there was no competition, and that might actually be something worth visiting. Could you put a show on in a park at some point where it's just performing, where it's just, literally International Dance Day, sharing the dance of love, or the love of dance, like no pressure, but like you're performing. You got your eyelashes on, you got your costume, you're still sort of feeling through that experience. Lucie, this has been incredible. I'm so grateful that we were able to transport you over to Canada again. I am so grateful to the ADA for opening this opportunity and for Bobby to help support it on International Dance Day. I'm very excited. Oh, I should say, I did post the New York Times article and the podcast that I referenced in the chat, and I'm very excited. Lucie's going to be joining the mental skills teacher training for a little snippet in August, which I'm very excited about, so the conversation will continue. And I'm just really, really grateful for everybody who showed up today and everybody who's watching the replay. Not only is it International Dance Day, and we love dance so much, but you and everybody who is curious about mental skills, mental health, reaching out to counselors and psychologists and getting dancers and the dance community this new conversation and this support is literally going to change how we train and educate dancers. And this is where I'm so excited. And I know Lucie's work has been just incredibly impactful and powerful. She's on a lot of podcasts. If you want to keep listening to her, all you got to do is Google her name and up she pops. Lucie, we're so grateful for you and your work. So thank you. And check her out at The Dance Psychologist. She always posts wonderful information, links, blogs, people, conversations. Thank you so much, Lucie, and thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Lucie. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you to the Edmonton Arts Council and the Alberta Dance Alliance, as well as Alberta Foundation for the Arts. Let's have a great International Dance Day and celebrate what you love to dance about.
Thank you, my friends. Go enjoy the day. Have fun. Do the Charleston. Do some diaper bomb bounces.